Hello again. We are going to be looking at problem number 3 in your Geometry Part 1 textbook. This is found on page 159 of the textbook. And to be able to do problems 3 and then ultimately we'll come back and do 4 a little bit later, these problems are based on the rules starting on page 157 of the converse of these different angle rules. We learned a long time ago that if two lines are parallel, that the corresponding angles are congruent, that the alternate interior angles are congruent, that the alternate exterior angles are congruent, and the list goes on and on. But we can use that in the opposite way, or the converse way, to help us determine whether two lines are parallel or not. And so if two particular angles, say corresponding angles, are congruent to each other, then we can say, well, then that makes the lines parallel to each other. So you really need to look through and read pages 157 and 158 to look at those rules. Now, as we look at problem number 3 here, it says to determine whether lines are parallel or not, which is exactly what we're going to be doing. It says the fence gate at the right is made up of pieces of wood arranged in various directions. Suppose angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So if you look carefully, that's these two over here. You've got the two pink lines, and angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Are lines R and S parallel? And if so, explain. Well, the answer is yes. R is parallel to S. Not because it looks like it, but because angle 1 and angle 2, if you look at these, are considered to be alternate exterior angles. And if those lines and the transversal form congruent alternate interior angles, so we're saying if 1 and 2 are congruent, and it told us they were, then the lines must be parallel. And again, that is the converse to the alternate exterior angles. And that simply says that if those two angles, which are alternate exterior angles, are congruent to each other, then that helps me prove that line R is congruent to line S. Okay. Now, in the got it section here, it says in problem 3, what is another way to explain why R is parallel to S, and then justify your answer? Well, as you can see here, angle 2 and angle 3 are across from each other. We call those vertical angles. And you learned earlier in the chapters that vertical angles are always equal to each other. So if one, because it told us right here in statement 1 that if angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, then technically, since 2 and 3 are equal to each other, then angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. We've called that really the transitive property. But if 1 and 2 are congruent, and 2 is congruent to 3, then 1 and 3 are also congruent. Well, what are 1 and 3? Technically, 1 and 3 are called corresponding angles because they're in the same location of each place where the transversal cut through the two lines. Okay? And so those are called corresponding. And again, from the converse of the corresponding angle rule, if these are congruent to each other, then again, these lines are parallel. So that would have been yet another way to prove that these lines are parallel. And again, it goes back to using all of those rules that start on page 157 and 158, talking about how to prove lines are parallel. I hope this was helpful.